Welcome to the lifestyle segment of the weekend show. Today we have a special guest joining us, a lawyer and the host of the podcast, Talk to Me Direct. This podcast unites influential African voices across the continent to engage in democratic processes, both offline and online, safely and effectively. Joining us virtually, our guest is Natasha Kimani. Good morning, Natasha.
Morning.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you. Can you
Okay.
hear
Oh,
me?
yes, clearly. All right. I would like to see you come up on video.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Will
please.
I be the only one in video?
No, with both of us.
I can't see you.
Okay. I'm sure we're having just some little technical difficulties, but it will be sorted out pretty soon. All right. I can see you clearly now. Thank you so much for coming on, Natasha.
Thank
All
you for
right.
having me.
Yeah, so we're talking Talk to Me Direct. It's very interesting seeing as I'm the one interviewing you now, but on your show, you interview so many influential people across Africa. So now I want you to talk to me direct on your podcast. Why did you create this podcast? Why do you want to enhance African voices concerning democratic processes, young people and women in politics as well? What made you begin your podcast?
So, this podcast, I didn't begin it. It is actually a project by the Luminate group, Luminate Foundation. And the essence of the podcast was to amplify conversations and shift the narrative around civic spaces, governance, technology, and the impact it's having on the continent. And when they reached out to me to be a part of this podcast, I couldn't say no because this is stuff I'm passionate about and I love, particularly ensuring an increase in representation by youth and women politically and in civic spaces on the continent. And that's why I said yes.
Okay, so your podcast focuses on young people and women in politics. So, what opportunities for women and young people's participation in politics have emerged during your interviews with all these influential individuals?
I think first and foremost is what's emerged is there's an increased awareness on the continent that young people are beginning to see that they have agency to take control of their lives, to take control of decisions, and not just sit back and wait for every 5 years for elections. There's an agency increasing across the continent that we are paying attention to. Second is to find ways to come together collectively to challenge some systems, build collective power, to ask difficult questions. How can they be part of these political structures? How can they be part of political processes? How can they get elected to political office? How does it work? What can they do next? And these are some of the things that the podcast revealed, that there's space for engagement. Young people are ready and capable. They don't need to wait another 20 to 30 years. They can begin now.
Yeah. Exactly. As a young person, I 100% agree with what you've said. So I would like to hear your thoughts
Yeah.
on women's involvement in politics and their part in democratic processes, playing their part. What are your thoughts on that?
So interestingly enough, what in across the continent, women are known as the greatest grassroots mobilizers. So when politicians want to mobilize the vote, they rely on women. And when they want people to vote, the greatest voters are women. But we rarely consider women as elected leaders, and that is a challenge. So we are good enough to be grassroots mobilizers. We are good enough to be voters, but we're not good enough to be leaders. And that's one of the questions we need to ask ourselves. Are we creating an environment that's safe enough for women to run? A lot of African female politicians have reported the challenges they face on the campaign trail. For example, it's more violent for women on the campaign trail. It's more difficult for women to raise funds to run for elected office. And even in political parties, penetrating political parties is much more difficult for female candidates when they want to run for elected office. Therefore, even though there's room for women to run, the many barriers that exist make it very difficult for women to run for elected office. And let's not forget the stereotypical and sometimes traditional narratives we have around leaders and the way we label women who want to run for office with terrible names because how dare they try to do something different from what is normally done.
So, as a Nigerian who has listened to your podcast, I've seen you've had lots of amazing and influential Nigerians on. One is the Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, Dr. Bosun Tijani. I would like to know, what did your conversation with him offer about the role of technology in promoting civic engagement in Africa?
So with Dr. Basu, that is one of my most interesting conversations. We focus largely on technology, the impact it's had on the continent, the way African governments sometimes negatively use technology to hamper and clamp down on civic voices, but also how it has enhanced government effectiveness. But most importantly, the role that African governments and Africans need to take in the AI conversation. We cannot be left behind. We need to ensure that our leaders are getting involved in the AI conversation. One, because a lot of African labor is being used to generate AI data. But they're going to be making decisions, and oftentimes we won't be involved, yet we'll be the most impacted by these decisions. So these are some of the conversations that I had with Dr. Basun. It was an incredible episode, one of my favorites.
So it was very interesting to see the podcast explore
I
storytelling
can't see your face.
through film.
I still can't see your face.
Sorry, can you hear me clearly?
No, yes, but I can't see your face.
Okay, I'm sure that'll be sorted out very soon. All
Can
right,
I
but
also switch off my camera?
no,
Really weird speaking to a
no, it will be sorted out very
blank.
soon. Just leave your camera on. It will be sort. You'll see me very very soon. So it was very
Okay.
interesting, seeing your podcast explore storytelling through film to drive civic to promote civic engagement. Actually, that's what it was doing. What insights did you gain from your conversation with the Kenyan filmmaker Judy Kibinge?
I think what stood out the most for me is the impact that film has on narratives. The way we think about ourselves is largely influenced by what we see and what we listen to. Therefore, it's very important to invest in film. It's very important to invest in music because it shapes our beliefs and perceptions about ourselves. And it's important to also use film to tell stories, whether it's about politics, whether it's about civic engagement, because this is the first platform, especially young people get to engage with first. Pop culture. So, how do we ensure that pop culture is telling the right stories about Africa?
Interesting you say pop culture because one of our largest exports here in Nigeria is our music. So I'm there with you when it comes to
Absolutely.
storytelling through music too, as well as film. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So
I think what Nigeria has been able to do
yeah.
is shift the narrative globally around the
Yes.
impact and importance of African music. So imagine if we did the same thing with film, how impactful we'd be as a continent.
Very impactful because we have lots of stories to tell from our traditional
Absolutely.
African stories to the contemporary stories from this generation. So it's very, very important. I agree with you on that. So,
And also,
yeah.
just the thing about storytelling is that people have perceptions of Africa, not just Africa, African countries. They assume we are the same. They assume Nigeria and Kenya are the same. Yet our dynamics are totally different. Even within Kenya, someone living in Nairobi and someone living in Mombasa has extremely different experiences. And the thing about storytelling, what it does is that it shows and shapes the different stories of Africans across the continent. And that's important.
Yes, very, very important. So now talking about you, how has Talk to Me Direct changed your own perspective when it comes to civic engagement in and across Africa?
I think for me, what Talk to Me Direct has shown me is that there's so many conversations that need to take place. There's so many things happening on the continent, so many great things that we don't know about. Because of the many challenges that we face on the continent, it's often easy to focus on what's going wrong. And we forget about what's going right. There's so much going right on the continent. And Talk to Me Direct was a perfect example of that for me. People are doing incredible things on the continent. For
Yeah.
example, Dr. Bosun, oftentimes you have many assumptions about government officials, yet he's doing incredible things. We have Chinenye, who's working incredibly with youth in Nigeria, Polly, who's working in Kenya, building communal spaces, Judy Kibinge, who's working on film. There's a lot happening, and we need to tell more of these stories. We need to find people working in these spaces and amplify their voices, but also find ways for them to work together. How can someone in Nigeria work effectively with someone in South Africa and Kenya?
Yeah, I agree with you. Collaboration would help
Collaboration.
strengthen us as Africans. So
Absolutely.
yes, before we go, what is the future of Talk to Me Direct? What should we look forward to?
That's a good one. I think that question is best asked to my producers. But I'm hoping that with Talk to Me Direct, there's room for more stories. More stories because we focused on Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. I'm hoping we can expand that scope to focus on other countries that are doing incredible things on the continent because oftentimes we focus on those big three.
Yeah.
Because often, yeah. So hopefully we'll expand a bit more. But that is best answered by my producer.
But do you have a dream guest for your podcast?
Oh my God, I have so many. I have so many dream guests. Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, you know, so many former presidents that I'd love to have conversations with.
Yeah.
Trailblazers, female trailblazers, Winnie Kiza from Uganda, who's done incredible things. The former president of Ethiopia, who recently resigned, I feel her story hasn't been told. Her experiences with in Ethiopian leadership have not been amplified. So there's so many people I'd love to have conversation with. How is your work impacting the continent and your country at large? So these are some of the things I dream about.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Natasha Kimani, for joining us. And we'll keep listening to your podcast, Talk to Me Direct, to learn more and also in our own little way amplify our voices when it comes to democratic processes across Nigeria. It was really good having you on the weekend show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
You too. All right, that's it for the first part of our lifestyle segment here on the Weekend Show. We'll come to you shortly, but for now, it's time for Andy's favorite segment, the breakfast segment.